All right, so in our last set of notes, we focused a great deal on the nomination process. We talked about the 5 nominating methods, and most importantly, we talked about direct primaries as being the main nominating method that's used here in the U.S. We talked about the difference between open and closed primaries, and then we talked about the process as a whole and how it starts out with primaries, then moves to the national conventions, where delegates will actually choose the two candidates that will run side by side, and then we have the general election or presidential election where the 2 candidates will campaign, raise money, get volunteers, do commercials, advertisements, all kinds of things in order to help them get elected. Debates occur. And so today we're going to switch gears. We're going to start talking about mass media. Specifically, we're going to focus on the role of mass media in providing public with political information, how the mass media influences politics, and the factors that limit the influence of media. So here are some examples of media. There are many forms, and they greatly impact American politics. So we've got television, radio, newspaper, magazines, the internet, books, films. And so specifically, we're going to focus in on these 4: television, newspapers, radio, and magazines. And then we're also going to be looking at internet as well, as that is probably the main source today that is used for our generation, the younger generation, to get our news about politics. So a medium is a means of communication. It transmits information, and there are 4 major forms of mass media in American politics. And again, I think internet would be included in this today. This is an older PowerPoint slide. So television, politics and television have gone hand in hand since the technology first appeared. Today, television is the principal source of political information for a majority of Americans. After that, next in line would be newspapers, radio, and then magazines. And it's important that you understand that 60% of campaign money is spent on TV ads. Newspapers. The first newspapers carried mostly political news, even with the total number of newspapers declining. They are still the second leading source of political information for most Americans. There are still 10,000 newspapers in circulation, and 45% of the nation's adults read the newspaper every day and spend an average of 30 minutes reading it. From 1781 to 1960, print media dominated the news political coverage. In the 60s, that's when TV began to take over with news channels such as CBS, ABC, NBC, our top trusted news agencies. The radio. On average, Americans hear 20 hours of radio each week. Radio has been a source of news and entertainment since 1920. The average person listens to it about 20 hours a week. And until 1985, the Federal Communications Commission, FCC, and the Fairness Doctrine regulated the railroad. It wasn't until 1985 that the radio was free to say and do as they please. Previously, they could not push an agenda. They had to be both-sided and show no political slant, and this is when we see Rush Limbaugh. Magazines. Some 12,000 magazines are published in the United States today. Several magazines are devoted to American news and politics. All right, I just want to focus in on internet as a type of mass media just a little bit more. So it's on pace to be just like television, an abundant amount of information. Some pros: it's very quick, it's very easy to find information very quickly, and you can get messages to large audiences as well pretty easily. Cons: the information is not always reliable, can't always be verified. Anyone can get on the internet and write anything, and so we don't really know that information is factual. And with Facebook specifically, I've actually looked at some studies that have shown that Facebook could be leading to more voter turnout. However, I do want to note that voter turnout has actually been increasing slightly since 2002. But what we're seeing is on Facebook, there's a lot more civic involvement. So people are posting and responding to one another about their political views, and that's about 40% of the population. It's leading to more awareness of how your friends have voted, which could potentially lead to blocking for some of the posts that they're making. And so, it's encouraging people to get involved in politics and could potentially be leading to more voters. We also see that when you're on Facebook and you select to read certain articles or go to certain sites on Facebook, it learns what you like, and that includes politics. And so we're definitely starting to see more partisan filtering for your liking. So if you click on a lot of Republican sources, then you're going to see more Republican platform, more issues that Republicans are, or their stance on certain issues. And we're seeing this happen a lot more than on news wires. So Facebook is a lot more geared towards what you believe. Which, potentially could be good because you're informed, but at the same side, you're not seeing the whole picture. You're not seeing the other party's platform in that instance. You also can complete polls on Facebook as well. These are then posted and actually have a huge impact on elections. All right, so television has historically been dominated by three major stations, ABC, CBS, and NBC. We also see CNN, Fox News. They also are definitely news channels that are pretty popular. And so those top three major channels are starting to lose some of their dominance in the area of television due to the birth of 24-hour news stations. Like I said, Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, CNBC. I also want to point out that some of these 24-hour news stations have a bias, a liberal bias or a conservative bias. And conservative, I mean Republican, and liberal, I mean Democratic. So like CNN has a liberal bias, Fox News has a conservative bias. The radio in general, which I know I'm kind of switching gears on you here, but the radio in general has a conservative bias. Internet tends to be more liberal. The TV in general just seems to be 50-50 really. The newspapers tend to be more conservative. And so we have to keep this in mind. We have to keep in mind this bias. And we want to make sure that we're looking at sources that are either 50-50, or we need to look at some sources that are conservative and some that are liberal so that we can really get the whole picture and hopefully get the most accurate information possible so we can make the most informed decision when it comes time for us to vote. Media statistics. So access to media varies from country to country. And so what you can kind of see from this chart here is that the United States, Italy, Canada, radio seems to be the source that most people are using or have access to. And so you'll probably notice here that the internet was not really mentioned. Obviously, it is widely used, for research on politics, but the percent is extremely low compared to the overall use of the internet. And so, this could be for a number of reasons, but I think the most important one is probably just the availability, that not as many people have access to internet as they do a radio. There's also media watchdogs. And these are just websites which rate the media and give examples of their bias, which is really great because it helps us to know, the sources that we're looking at, how are they biased, in what ways are they liberal bias, conservative bias, and that way we can make sure we look at a variety of sources so we can make an informed decision when it comes to voting. All right, so the media and politics, the public agenda. Media exposes current problems needing attention. The media doesn't always tell people what to think, does tell people what to think about. And so the most recent example that I can think of concerning this would be school shootings. So what is very interesting is that you probably have been hearing a lot about the school shootings, especially in 2018, and how there has actually been 18 school shootings this year. Now, if you had done your research, you would realize that technically there have not been that many. There have actually been only 4 to 7. It really just depends on what you consider a school shooting. And so included in that 18 are accidental shootings, also shootings that were not on school property, people who brought guns to school but actually didn't shoot anyone. And so again, there were a lot of other instances that were grouped in with this 18, and it was not always an intent to kill. And so again, it depends on your definition of a school shooting, but the media took that number 18 and ran with it, and they have used it over and over and over again, and they're clearly trying to bring attention to this issue, and they're making us think about it. Now, they're not telling us what to think about it, but they're definitely making us think about is mental illness to blame? Is, lack of gun control to blame? And so it's getting us thinking, it's putting pressure on legislators to take action, putting pressure on the president to take action. And it's clearly probably, their hidden agenda. Election politics. So TV, internet allow candidates to appeal directly to the people without the help of a party. And candidates regularly use media coverage to their advantage. It's also important that you understand that candidates, they work very hard to get good media coverage and to provide the media with good sound bites, which this is just very focused, snappy statements that can be aired in 35 to 45 seconds. And so then for candidates to be seen in a good light as far as media coverage, they do a variety of things. They try to plan ahead. They probably try to stay on the offensive, control the flow of information, limit reporters' access to them, talk about the issues you want to talk about, speak in one voice, and maybe even repeat the same messages many times so that they will sink in. All right, limits on media influence. So a small percent of people understand much of what the media says about public affairs. Media mostly skims the news, reporting only what gets ratings, hot topics, and a lot of times with this, they also doctor the truth or, present the news in a way that is going to sell papers or get you to turn to their newscast. Or news source, primarily because they're trying to get their ratings up. And so this isn't always going to be truthful or detailed information. In-depth coverage of public affairs is available to those who want it and will seek it out. Also, those who tend to watch, listen, or read choose their favorite sources rather than sources with contrary opinions to their own. So, for example, many Democrats do not watch televised campaign appearances of Republican candidates and vice versa. Another example would be Fox News. And so if you are a conservative, you would probably tune into Fox News because it has a conservative bias. And in that, you might not get the other side of things, the more liberal side. You're only getting the conservative side. It's also critical to remember that the media possesses bias. It comes from a certain angle or perspective, and that 40% of journalists, when polled, admitted they leaned to the left. They promote progressive change, more on the Democratic side. And only 25% leaned to the right. The ideas of bias doesn't particularly mean how a story is slanted, but on what stories are told and how they see the world. Also here in the U.S., media is privately owned, and the First Amendment protects those journalists and broadcasters from government issues. And what's also interesting about editors and people higher up in the news world. So, not just your editors, but also your producers, they are actually the people who, you know, look at what happened the day before and decide, okay, from these stories, from these events, what do I want to cover? What do I think is the most important? And then that's what's shown to us. And so that's biased in itself because they're choosing